name is Michelle Bukowski, and I'm a mixed media reuse artist. Welcome to my studio. If you followed along in my last video and made an art journal layout with me, you noticed that I use a lot of different materials. So I thought it might be fun to do a series where I share with you my favorite art supplies. And today we're going to start with acrylic gesso. You will hear me refer to gesso a lot. I use it in a lot of different ways, and I thought I would show you some of the basics and a couple different kinds and a couple different surfaces you can use it on. So let's get started. So we are going to be looking at white primer. So this is the Liquitex Basic Acrylic. It is fluid, so like I could pour it. There's also a thicker primer that you can get in other brands and other thicknesses. These two are both a little on the thinner side. There's also clear gesso, which has a lot of fun uses, and you can get pre-made black gesso. You can also tint your primer, right? So you could tint either a clear or a white gesso. This will make it a little bit lighter in color. This will keep the color, but we're gonna focus on the white gesso today. If you're interested in knowing more about these, leave me a comment and I'll do another one about other kinds of gesso. So when I say it's a primer, what you probably are used to seeing is a canvas, right? So this is a gessoed canvas, and you can tell because it's white. And this is what your canvas actually looks like. It's a cream color. So this canvas is ready to paint. But what if I'm working on a different substrate? So this is wood, and this is unprimed, right? If I use this, the paint or ink or whatever I'm using could soak right into the wood, and it's not going to give me the effects I want. So I could gesso it. Now this one I actually am reusing. I didn't like what I did, and so I sanded it back, did a layer of gesso, and now this is ready to paint again. And I'll show you how to do it on this one. So you can brush the gesso on, or you can use a palette knife, or an actual palette knife, or you can use the catalyst tool. It doesn't matter which way you want to do it, it's all the same. So I'm gonna pour some gesso here, just to show you can paint. Now see, you can still see what's underneath, and that's fine. The thing is that when you paint over it, it will now stick to the gesso and not what's underneath. Now, you could use catalyst tool if you wanted to get maybe some texture, which is another thing you can do with gesso, right? You can add some texture. You see it's already got some texture from what was underneath. By the way, this is by no means a comprehensive lesson in gesso. There are so many different things you can do with this very versatile tool, or excuse me, versatile medium. But regardless, this is now ready for paint when it dries. So you saw me create this art journal layout in my last video. And here's another way that I use it. So oftentimes, because I am working in a composition book, which is made of thin paper, right, I will start with the background of miscellaneous papers. This is a hot mess. Nobody's going to like this, and this might be a little difficult for some people to get past. So I call it knocking this back when you start with different papers, because what this does for me is I see like a color palette emerging, these purples and blues, and a little bit of green maybe as a highlight color. I just randomly pulled paper out and just glued it down. Like this kind of goes, but it's probably not going to be colors I use, but these are going to be some colors I probably end up ultimately using. But it's just too much, right? It's like screaming in your face. So you can take some of the gesso, and I'm going to use my catalyst tool, and we're going to knock it back, right? We're just going to let some of the stuff peek through. Some of it's going to get completely covered, and as you saw in the last video, some of it's going to get covered at the very end anyhow. And if you want to know why I start this way, it helps strengthen these pages because they are not made for this. But it also, like I said, gives me a color palette, gives me a place to start, and I don't have to think about it. I just start with my miscellaneous papers, some gesso, and you'll see here that once I kind of cover up what doesn't feel like that orange, no thank you, not an orange person. And we're gonna really cover that up. But even that red, right, it's a little in your face with the rest of it. The rest of this is a pretty nice muted palette. And again, I showed you, you could use, if you don't have a catalyst tool, you can use palette. I call these palette knives. It's a gift card. Let's be real. It's a gift card. All right. Now, okay, it is, all of these colors that were kind of in your face now are knocked back. It's a little more unified. You see some of the purples and the green and some of these blues are still showing through. And so now once this dries, I'm ready to go in with another layer, whether that's paint, maybe I'm gonna put my focal element down now. It doesn't matter. All of this is feeling a little more uniform. If I just didn't like any of it, I could come back in with another thicker layer of gesso and basically just have this. So this is basically the same thing. I've got craft paper and some things underneath, but it's a much thicker coat. You really don't see a whole lot of that color coming through. So this could be, if I had an idea in mind and I didn't need a color palette, I could start this way. But now I want to show you the difference between a gessoed substrate and one that's not. And so you know I use book pages in my art a lot. All right, so this side has gesso and this side has nothing on it. So we're going to start with a little bit of watercolor. All right, so this is the gessoed side. And you can see that it's sitting right on top. I can move it. You see, I can move it. See, but it's still sitting right on top. Now, take a little bit of the gesso. Excuse me, I'm taking a little bit of the watercolor. You can see it's soaked already in. I can move it a little bit, but it doesn't have, but see it, how it's soaked into that paper, right? What if I used ink? Okay, so it reacts the same way. See, it's sitting on top, whereas this, well, this one has some movement. Look, it's soaked right in. And here we go. Look at the effects we have here, just from moving it around a little bit with some water, versus here it's flat, right? There's no dimension to it. And here, once this dries, it's gonna have these cool little peaks and valleys like that does. Something like this. These are Stabilo woodies. They're water soluble as well. And I'm going to do on the gessoed side and the ungessoed side again. See how creamy and beautiful that is with all that pigment. And again, just seeps into the paper, and you can really see the difference on the back, right? See, it soaks in, and on the gessoed side, didn't soak in at all. Look how fast that dried. And look how that's still wet. I can still move that. And then, of course, there's your acrylic paint. We're going to use a palette knife for this. Or you could use a brush. Let's get some of that. All right, So it's got a little more water in it. So I could use it more like a watercolor, right? But see how that keeps that, it's got a little bit of peak in there. Now, if I do the same thing with no gesso, again, see, right? It's seeped right into that paper. See, that's still sitting on top. It's still drying. That's still right into the paper. And same here. It's just seeping right into the paper. What else can you do with gesso as a basic? So what if we wanted to add some texture? Now, I don't have a thick bodied gesso, so I'm not going to get as thick a texture as I could if I had this nice thick textured gessos. And those generally come in tubs like this. But you can still see, right? I can leave some texture like that. See how it holds those peaks, right? I could also take a stencil. And again, this one would work better if I had a thicker, or maybe if I used a smaller stencil. But you get the idea, right? There you have it, a couple different ways I use gesso in my art practice, and a couple different things you can do with it. And then if you've noticed, I showed you the basics line from Liquitex. There's, every brand has a gesso. So if you have a bigger budget, you could go with something like a golden or the Liquitex that's not in their basic line. If you had a more, if you had a limited budget, you could go to any of the arts and crafts stores and get their brand, and they work just as well. So let me know if you give them a try, and leave me a comment below to tell me what you think. Bye.